Chapter 3 of the Principles of Management will tackle about ethics and social responsibility. Now, the purpose of this chapter is to familiarize with the key issues in ethics and social responsibility altogether. Now, to accomplish this purpose, we describe topics such as the philosophical principles behind business ethics and a guide to ethical decision-making process. Okay. Now, the chapter will also explain the social responsibility um, issues from the such perspective. And then, at the same time, focus on the stakeholder viewpoint and the social responsibility initiatives. And then finally, we will also look at the payout from being ethically and socially responsible in all of our dealings, in all of our transactions. Okay, now after the learning objectives of our lesson for the chapter 6 is for us to be able to identify the philosophical principles behind the business ethics. At the same time, explain how values relate to ethics. And then at the same time, you also identify the factors that will contribute to lax ethics and common ethical temptations that are present and abound in the industry and in every organization, and the violation that goes with it. Also, the chapter will tackle the application and a guide to ethical decision-making process. And then also, this chapter will give us an insight about how to describe the stakeholders' viewpoint of social responsibility and the corporate social performance of the industry. And then present an overview of the social responsibility initiative even will be provided by the chapter. And lastly, it will give us some insight in the description of what social responsibility initiatives are aiming for, specifically at building a sustainable environment. Now, knowing about business ethics and social responsibility should help us achieve the good performance in these two important aspects of the business life. What are we referring to here as the two important aspects of the business life? So number one, the business ethics. Now, the business ethics, we define what is ethics under the business ethics. So ethics is the study of moral obligation or separating from the right and the wrong. And also, all ethics can be regarded as the vehicle that converts values into action. There are unethical acts that can be legal or illegal in definition. And then customers and suppliers are preferring to deal with the ethical companies, most specifically, and that's very much important. Now, the moral intensity is the magnitude of an ethical act. Okay, so people are often unethical actually about small matters. Uh, for example, making a photocopy for personal use, or taking home some supplies, office supplies, now whatever there is. So these things, small matters, but big in impact. Now, what are the philosophical principles underlying the business ethics? When attempting to decide what is right and wrong, managerial workers can focus on the following. So, number one, consequences. Number two, duties, obligations, and principles. And then number three, integrity. Okay, so these are the philosophical principles that underlies business ethics. Now, focus on consequences and pragmatism. According to utilitarianism, if nobody gets hurt, the decision is ethical. So that is utilitarianism. Closely related to pragmatism. So the belief that there are no absolute principles or standards, no objective truth, and no objective reality. Truth is however or whatever works. or helps you attain the goal you want. Okay? Now, number two, focus on the right of the individuals. We call it deontology. Again, deontology, Deontology is a focus on the right of individuals. According to deontological theory, people must examine their duties when making a decision. Okay? The deontological approach is based on the universal principles such as honesty, fairness, justice, and respect for persons' property, rights, and others. Now, such as rights to privacy and safety are also being focused and considered very much important. Another one is focus on integrity. Now, this is under the virtue ethics. Now, if the person in question has good character and genuine motivation and intentions, he or she is behaving ethically considered. Now, the decision maker's environment helps define integrity. The virtue ethics of managers and makers' environment help define integrity. Now, the virtue ethics of managers and professionals who belong to professional societies can be readily judged. Now, all three philosophical approaches might be necessary when facing a complex ethical decisions. Now, when faced with a complex ethical decision, you are best advised to incorporate all three philosophical approaches. Now, you might think, though, that the consequences of a decision, along with the analysis of duties, rights, and principles, and intentions included. Okay? Now, we go, so we have now discussed on the philosophical principles underlying business ethics. Now, we go to values and ethics. Now, values are clear statement of what is critically important. Ethics become the vehicle for converting values into action or doing the right thing. Affirms moral standards and values will help guide ethics in decision-making process. Now, a person's values also influence which kind of behaviors he or she believes are ethical. So therefore, the ethically centered management will emphasize that the high quality of an end product takes precedence over its scheduled completion. Okay? Now, a product or service would therefore not be delivered until its bugs were eliminated. Now, the concept of ethically centered management is helpful. Helpful in the sense that it can help us understand what went wrong in many product recalls somehow, for example. And then the product developers and manufacturers might have given such a tight deadline for product delivery that thorough field-tested inspection was not even possible at the time. So that is ethically centered management. By not delivering the product until it's perfected in the process. Okay. Another one is the sources of unethical decisions and behavior. Ethical problems remain a major concern in the workplace. Okay, 90% of employees having witnessed are lying to employees. Okay? And then 9% having witnessed even stealing. So there are issues like this. So lying and pretensions and deceptions are also, somehow being committed. More so with small or big steal. So stealing is based on one of the statistics commanded about 9%. That's huge. Now, under the sources of unethical decisions and behavior comes the individual characteristics.
Alright.
Individual characteristics. Now, self-interest can influence ethics, and often taking the form of greed and gluttony, or the desire to maximize self-gain at the expense of others. Okay? People might also have unconscious biases that would lead them to behave in unjust ways towards the others. Now, a pervasive reason for unethical behavior is rationalization or making up a good excuse for poor ethics as a result. Now, for example, a person might reason out that other people are also cheating in a lot of ways, or job dissatisfaction can also contribute to unethical behavior. Okay. Now, next is the nature of the moral issue. Now, the moral intensity of the issue is a driver of unethical behavior, with many people willing to behave unethically when the issue does not appear serious. Now, another issue-related driver of unethical behavior is moral laxity. Okay, a moral laxity is a slippage in moral behavior because other issues seems more important at the time. Okay, another one is the ethical climate in organizations being considered. Now, another major contributor to unethical behavior is an organizational climate that condones such behavior. Now, the financial scandals at Enron, as an example, Enron Corporation will illustrate how a culture of lawless behavior and high risk taking directly feeds unethical and even criminal behavior. Now, the unethical behavior is often triggered by pressure from the higher management to achieve goals. Now, too much emphasis on meeting financial targets can push workers to even meeting the targets in a questionable ways. So these are the predicament, no? And yeah. Now, an unethical decision or behavior can sometimes stem from a combination of individual, issue-related, and organizational factors. Now, based on the analysis of the Toyota recalls, it's a good example and it's relevant here, no, as described in our discussion earlier. Now, we identify the ethical temptations and violations. Now, at least commonly found ethical temptations and violation in an industry and organization, including criminal acts, are as follows. Okay, number one is stealing from employer and customers. Number two, illegal copying software, no, under copyright, copyright. And then treating people unfairly, under discrimination and prejudice. Sexual harassment, conflict of interest. Now, conflict of interest occurs when judgment or objectivity is compromised. Accepting kickbacks and bribes for doing business with another company. Now, divulging confidential information, so meaning violating trust. Misuse of corporate resources, and then extracting extraordinary compensation from the organization. Another one is the corporate espionage. It's important. And then poor cyber ethics. Okay? So these are only commonly found ethical temptations and violation that would tantamount to criminal acts even. Now, next is the business scandals as ethical violations. Now, the best known scandals are associated with infamous executives. Yet, scandals are also perpetuated by hundreds of players, including the internet fraud, including the identity theft, and work-at-home scams. So, there are lots of it, especially right now in the pandemic stage. No, Okay, among the financial and personal consequences of major financial scandals have been mammoth job losses. Now, the wiping out of pension funds is one good, very good example. And then, huge investment losses by individuals because of the scammers. and the bankruptcy of vendors who supplied the companies that went bankrupt. So these are the things that would command scandals and ethical violations. Four well-publicized scandals are click fraud, meaning clicking on internet ads solely to generate revenue. And then Enron Corporation, so it is all over. No, the case at Enron Corporation is kept on coming up as a very good example in every lessons, in every cases. Now, letter C is the preparation of a fraudulent financial document, which is abound, especially when a company is window dressing the financial statements and documents. Okay, and these fraudulent financial documents will somehow intended to deceive investors. Now, letter D is the backdating stock option at Silicon Valley companies. Most of the Silicon Valley companies are actually backdating, no? Meaning it's a fraudulent, no, representation of the stock options. Now, the people commit these outrageous schemes for reasons of greed and gluttony, and the fact that the emotions can cloud anybody's judgment, no, by luring them into, good life, and then eventually turn out a scam. Now we go to the guide to ethical decision making. So how do we counter this? Now, ethical decision making can be improved by running the contemplated decision through an ethics test. And these tests are used at the Center for Business Ethics. So what are these guidelines? So number one, is it right? Okay. Number two, is it fair? Who gets hurt? Who would be comfortable if your decision were exposed publicly? Or would you be comfortable if your decision were exposed publicly? Would you tell your child or young relative to do it? How does it smell? How does it look? So these are the guide to ethical decision makings. Now, another type of decision can often require an ethical test. An ethical test is choosing between two rights rather than right versus wrong. So both are right, but then apparently there's the rightful right. An example would be laying off a poorly performing worker who is blind. Now, you might be challenged to find good examples of choosing between two rights. So that's really hard. Now, so much with the ethics. No? And then we go to the corporate social responsibility, under the social responsibility. Now, many people argue that organizations have an organization to actually respond to the needs of groups in the society, other than the owners and the stockholders of the company. Now, the corporate social responsibility is the idea of that the firm has an obligation to society beyond their economic obligations to owners or stockholders, and beyond those prescribed by law or contract. So the stakeholders. So they go beyond it. Now, one analysis suggests that corporate social responsibility has three components. So what are these three components? Number one is the cognitive. Cognitive implies thinking about the organization's relationships with its parties at interest, so stakeholders, no, direct affinity with the business. So that is cognitive. And then linguistics, no, so linguistic involves ways of explaining the organization's reasons for engaging in certain activities. So okay, so cognitive implies thinking, linguistic involves ways. Now, another one is the conative. Conative involves what the firm actually does, along with the commitment and consistency that it shows in being socially responsible. Okay, so we have three: cognitive, linguistic, and conative. Okay, many socially responsible actions are actually the byproducts of a sensible business decision. However, it is both socially responsible and profitable for a company to improve the language and math skills of entry-level workers rather than invest in local schooling. So that's a very good example. Now, a practical problem in practicing corporate social responsibility is that not all interested parties agree on what constitutes the responsible behavior. Okay? Now, the corporate social responsibility has these various aspects. So, number one, or letter A, is the stockholder versus stakeholder viewpoint. So they have different factions, so stockholder and the stakeholder. Now the traditional perspective is that the stockholders viewpoint, that businesses or business organization are responsible only to their owners and stockholders, to the owners and the stockholders. Now the stakeholder viewpoint of social responsibility contends that organization must hold themselves responsible for the quality of life of many groups affected by the organization's actions. So therefore, they go beyond the internal. No? So there. Okay, and many organizations regard their various stakeholders as partners in achieving success rather than as adversaries. Okay, they're partners. Now, stakeholders differ in their power in terms of legitimacy and urgency, such as the stakeholders are chaining themselves to a factory fence, for example, protecting themselves. Letter B is the corporate social performance. The corporate social performance being defined as the extent to which a firm responds to the demands of its stakeholders for behaving in socially responsible manner. Now, one way to measure social performance is to analyze the company's annual report. And this annual report will be in search of the relevant statistical information that is shown in the documents. And then another approach is for measuring corporate social performance. How do you do that? To observe, and what's the purpose? This performance is to observe how a company responds to social issues by examining their programs in more detailed ways. So that's reflected in the financial statements. Another one is the corporate social responsibility initiatives. Now, some organizations are being socially responsible by creating more opportunities for diverse groups. Now, we describe other social responsibility initiatives. Number one is the philanthropy. Now, a philanthropy is a standard approach to social responsibility, and they are donating money to charity and various other causes. Now, the new breed of philanthropists will study each charitable causes as he or she would be a potential business investors seeking maximum return in terms of social impact. Okay, now so social impact is important to the philanthropists. Now, next is work-life programs. Now, work-life programs is a major social responsibility initiative for organizations to establish a program that facilitate employees balancing the demands of work and personal life. Now, the intent is to help employees to lead a more balanced life and to be more satisfied and productive in the job. Okay, so work-life programs. Next is the community redevelopment projects. A community redevelopment projects are some business firms are actually investing resources in helping rebuild distressed communities. Now, this investment in the distressed communities can also mean offering job training for residents of the given or identified distressed community. Now, there, no? So these are the things. Now, another one is another one under the Corporate Social Responsibility Initiative is the acceptance of the whistleblowers. Now, a whistleblower is one employee who discloses organizational mishaps and wrongdoings, boosting profits or decrease the expenses. I'm sorry, organizing wrongdoings to parties who can take action. And more than a lot of numbers actually, whistleblowers were being ignored, no, and then ignored in a sense because their threat to the organizational existence even by making public of all the wrongdoings by the company. Now that is the acceptance of whistleblowers. So the manager needs the insight to sort out the difference between a troublemaker and a true whistleblower. Now next initiative is the compassionate downsizing. So what happens there? Downsizing actually is the slimming down of operations to focus resources and boost profits or decrease expenses. An example of the ill effect of downsizing has been the substantial collateral damage from the cutbacks in some companies. Now, even charitable organizations suffer, and even workers. Uh, Compassion includes even pondering whether to downsize at all and redeploying the workers that were affected. And then providing financial and emotional support is important issue, actions also, no, to the downsized worker, that is also important. Next is the environmental protection. Now, a major corporate trust toward the ethical and socially responsible behavior is for the business, for the industry, for the organization to be aware of the environmental protection. Now, uh, most company right now are geared towards for the non-profit organization to be green in all of its operations, image and branding. Now, make a deliberate attempt to actually create a sustainable project for sustainable environment issues, protecting the environment issues even. Now, the green approach is an approach to defining and creating processes. So what are these processes for the green approach? Number one, all of the processes should be environmentally friendly. So we see a lot of recyclables and waste management procedures are now being embedded in the processes of the business operations. Now, number two is the economically feasibility. Is it viable economically? So there. And then number three is pragmatic in the long term. So it has to have a reasonable pragmatism in the operations. Okay, so again, environmentally friendly, economically viable, and pragmatic in the long term. Now, these people often disagree about whether global warming exists even. But almost nobody disagrees that a clean, safe environment is actually desirable and wanting. Okay. Now, here are some highlights. 7 of them that is that illustratively approaches to environmental protection. Okay, so what are these? Number 1 is to commit to low carbon dioxide emissions, as well as other hazardous emissions. And then that are, a lot of violations are from the first world countries. Now, another one is number 2 is develop a green supply chain by using biodegradable materials. Number 3 is make sustainability and eco-friendly policies that is part of the business plan. Okay? Number 4 is to implement a 4-day work week so that less usage of the electricity, energy, and resources are being provided by this implementation of 4-day work week. Next is the manufacture and sell product with recyclable materials. And many companies are already adhering to this concept. Next is invest heavily in recycling, waste management, recycling programs, there. And then 7, plant a rooftop garden in your office building or in your factory vicinity. That is allowable, so that's it. Okay, so these are the 7 environmental approaches, okay, for protection. Now, how do we create an ethical and responsible workplace? Okay, so managers can develop strategies and integrating their programs to enhance the ethically and socially responsible attitudes that is to be embedded and introduced and embedded and practiced by the employees and stakeholders. Now, formal mechanism for monitoring ethics. So what are these? Now, majority of the companies with more or less 500 or more employees have ethics programs of various types. They were embedded in the policies of the organizations. Now, large organizations frequently set up ethics committees to help ensure that various ethical and socially responsible behavior are going to be practiced and be aware of. Okay? Now, what are the written organizational codes of conduct? About 75% of large companies use written codes of conduct as guidelines for ethical and socially responsible behavior. And it's important that it's going to be articulated again in the policies and of the organization. Now, some aspect of these codes are general, but such requiring people to conduct themselves with honesty and integrity, and with candor and passion. And then other aspects are specific, such as rules on accepting gifts from vendors, from customers, from suppliers. Okay? Now, we go to the widespread communication about ethics and social responsibility. So, what do you mean by it? Now, extensive communication about the topic reinforces ethically and socially responsible behavior. Now, the top management can speak widely about the competitive advantage of being being ethical and socially responsible in all of its dealings. Now, okay, we start by discussing the ethics and the social responsibility issues in small groups for them to be able to start actually and be aware that there's such an effort from the management level. Now, leadership by example and ethical role model. So what do we mean by it? A high-powered approach to enhancing actually ethics and social responsibility is for the members of top management to have in such a manner live by example by themselves. Now, leading by example is particularly useful actually in encouraging this ethical behavior and social responsibility attitude, because it will provide a useful role models for everyone. Okay, because influences are being provided by these leaders and cascaded to the employees. So in contrast, top executive are actually are distant figures who the workers rarely actually observe and directly observe. That's it. So, but then apparently they're a good example of leading by examples. Now, another one is encouragement of a confrontation about ethical deviation. So, how do you do that? How do you confront commissions of unethical deviations? Unethical behavior may be actually minimized if every employee confronts anybody that is committing and behaving unethically. And this approach actually is being encouraged workers to ask about the ethical implications, and by comparing it with the other firms even. Okay, training programs in ethics and social responsibility, uh, there no is part should be part of the policies that would engage the employees and all stakeholders. Form of training include messages about ethics from the executives down below, classes of ethics, and all of those things, seminars, conferences, are being has to have these programs, and most of all implement and exercise ethics in every approaches and operations. Okay, benefits that will be derived from ethics and social responsibility. Okay, no, so a lot, no. In fact, moral ascendancy, no, is the foremost of benefits. But then, despite potential costs from being ethically and socially responsible, socially responsible behavior appears to be cost-effective even. No? So, because research shows that more profitable firms can better afford to invest in social responsibility initiatives rather than in then this initiative it will in turn lead to more profits. Okay, so that's the virtuous cycle included. Now, the overall arguments for green management is that it matters because people expect managers to use resources prudently and responsibly. Why? Because to protect the environment and the stakeholders. And the experience of the London-based radio taxi cabs illustrates how reducing and offsetting carbon emissions can save a company a considerable amount use of money, because the being green can enhance organizational efficiency, and by means of that the recycling and reducing waste are being practiced and engaged, and that would be beneficial for the company even. Now, being ethical also helps avoid the cost of paying huge fines for being unethical, because a lot of Western world and a lot of countries are actually practicing the green operations, and they are very strict about the commissions of violations against it. Now, socially responsible acts can often attract and retain socially responsible employees. And it's good for everyone, most specifically employees, to be identified for a good-natured, ethically responsible companies. Okay? So that is the lesson for the chapter 3 of ethics and corporate social responsibility of the principles in management. So chapter 3, ethics and social responsibility. Thank you very much and have a good day.